My name is Cheramie. I am pleased to be the facilitator for today's Workplace Savings Lunch. The overarching theme of the conference has had an AI/security running through a lot of the presentations, and that is a key point of our lunch with you guys today. I'd like to introduce our two speakers today. We have Nick Valentine. He's a partner at DLA Piper. And we have Mike Ross. Mike Ross is the Chief Executive of Holistec Systems. And I will hand over to Nick, who will take us away.
Thanks very much, Joe. As Joe mentioned, I'm a partner at DLA Piper. If I haven't had the pleasure of working with you before, just a little bit about DLA Piper. We're a global law firm, typically sit around second or third largest firm in the world. We've got 90 offices in more than 40 countries. And on the cyber side, we've got, I think we're up to about 500 or 600 dedicated privacy, data, cybersecurity lawyers. And the reason that's relevant is because it's a real benefit for our New Zealand clients. We're constantly in touch with our colleagues overseas to get an update on what best practice is, particularly in Asia, Europe, and obviously the US, which is probably the biggest market for cybercrime. And we can bring those lessons down and help our clients here. So I lead our technology and data team in New Zealand. That means I lead our cyber practice. And that's two-pronged, basically. What I divide up into front-end and back-end cyber. The front-end is all about hardening cyber resilience, basically. So that can be relatively high-level privacy advice through to quite detailed data audits, helping organizations understand what their data and information assets are, where they're held and what they're used for. We'll help clients with preparing cyber incident response plans. You need to know what to do if something goes wrong. And tabletop exercises, so simulated cyber attacks for board C-suite executives. And then the back-end stuff, that's when something actually goes wrong. We'll help clients if they do get hacked, suffer a ransomware attack or whatever it may be. That's never really at friendly hours. The last 3 years in a row, I've had one either on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. So my wife, she's sort of encouraging me to look for an alternative career path, but fingers crossed we get through unscathed in the coming holiday season. Excuse me. What I'm going to do is whip through some of what we're seeing in terms of global cyber trends. And then zoom in a little bit into what's happening specifically in the financial services sector. And then have a look at some of the questions you need to ask yourself if you do suffer a breach. Little spoiler alert, one of the trends that I'll touch on is SaaS-based or cloud-based intrusions. And I think that's going to lead quite nicely into Mike's session. I won't give away too much about what he's going to say, but he's probably going to solve a few of the problems I'm going to highlight for you. So basically, my job is to terrify you, and then Mike's going to be your savior, swooping in with the fix to all those problems. So global cyber trends. Over the last 12 months, what we've seen is that threat actors have matured faster than ever, basically. They're innovating new techniques, finding creative solutions to circumvent modern cyber defenses. And they're staying laser focused on what their targets are. And financial services is obviously one of the most appealing targets for the threat actors. So just to set the scene, recent stats show that the average number of cyber attacks per organization reached almost 1,900 per week, which was a 75% increase year on year over the last 12 to 24 months. And the New Zealand losses in cyber attacks reached almost $7 million last year, the final 3 months of last year, which was a 91% increase in the last 12 months. So cyber's been a topic on the agenda for quite a long time now, but it's not going away, and the threats are getting more real. Looking at the key trends that you should be aware of, one of the most important ones is that hackers are moving away from malware delivery as their attack vector. Organizations over the last 3, 4, 5 years have invested heavily in cyber defense. So that includes software that's very good at detecting malware, patching it, responding to it. But hackers have adapted to that, and they've now got solutions to basically get around that. And the key tactic being employed is social engineering. So particularly leveraging telephone-based exploitation, so phishing, voice phishing, callback phishing, and help desk social engineering. What that means is rather than delivering malware, threat actors or hackers are increasingly leveraging legitimate remote monitoring and management tools. So if you've ever called your IT help desk and they remotely log on to your machine, it's those types of tools that they're leveraging to gain access to a victim's systems. And with that attack vector, deploying malware just isn't necessary for the attack. So a good example of this is quite a well-known hacking group called Curly Spider. I'm not quite sure how they come up with their names. I mean, that doesn't sound too terrifying, but they've been extremely successful. And they've basically got a playbook for their attacks, or a blueprint, which has been incredibly effective over the last 12, 24 months. So they rely heavily on social engineering for initial access to a victim's systems. So basically it plays out like a user will receive a whole lot of spam emails, so impersonating financial offers, charities, all the usual spam type emails that you'd expect. Those spam emails aren't designed to be particularly convincing, because very shortly after they get this spam bomb, someone will call that user posing as an IT help desk employee, saying that the spam's either caused by malware or outdated spam filters. Then that user's instructed to join a remote session. So Microsoft Quick Views are quite a common tool that a lot of IT help desks use to get remote access to a machine. And then the attackers even have kind of step-by-step instructions that they'll talk a user through if they don't already have the remote access tool downloaded. Once they gain initial access, the window of opportunity for that hacker is quite limited. They can only access the machine while they've got persistent access. So if that remote management session ends, so does their access. So to extend control, they somehow have to, in the time they're on the phone, enable or deploy, say, a backdoor to make sure that they have persistent access to the system. And that's where social engineering comes in again. So not only do they need to convince the user to give them initial remote access to their machine, while they're deploying the backdoor, they need to keep that user on the phone, keep convincing them that this is a legitimate call, that they are addressing this spam issue. They basically can't let the user figure out that this isn't legitimate. So once they've done that, they'll deploy the backdoor, and then from there, the world's basically their oyster. They can exfiltrate data, they can deploy ransomware type malware, or depending on the system they've got access to, they can initiate fraudulent transactions. There's a whole lot of stuff they can do there. So that's just one group, but this is really prevalent. You've probably heard of CrowdStrike, which, despite a pretty catastrophic outage last year, is still one of the leading cyber defense tools on the market. They publish some pretty good reports every year. During 2024, 80% of the attacks that CrowdStrike tools detected were malware-free. And this is a whole industry. These hacker groups basically have HR and recruitment teams because there's been a massive spike in recruitment ads, basically, on popular e-crime sites, looking for primarily English-speaking people who have experience working with remote monitoring and management tools, and particularly if they've worked for an IT help desk or managed service provider type company before. So it's a really professional, pretty highly polished enterprise. I mean, if it was legitimate, I'd probably be looking at buying shares, to be honest. Voice phishing attacks have skyrocketed 442% between the first and second half of this year. And in most 2024 campaigns, the data we've got is basically 12 months old, threat actors did impersonate someone from an IT help desk. So key takeaway is that's probably where one of your biggest vulnerabilities is. The flip side of IT help desk impersonation is IT help desk social engineering. So in that threat vector, attackers will call the IT help desk impersonating a legitimate user or employee at the organization and convince that help desk person that they have a legitimate password reset request or multi-factor authentication problem. And from there, they'll be able to reset the password, sort of sub in their own multi-factor authentication, and then they've got access via that user's credentials to the system. That sort of attack we're seeing really prevalent with outsourced IT help desk providers, which most New Zealand businesses are using. I think 3 of the cyber attacks that I've worked on in the last 12 months use that technique. So it is happening to New Zealand businesses as well. So what's best practice? How do you sort of mitigate the risk of this help desk social engineering? For New Zealand businesses, it's mostly outsourced. So you'd want to be checking with your vendors, whoever provides those help desk services for you, what they're doing. And some questions to ask are, how are you authenticating users who are asking for password reset requests, for example? Best practice is to authenticate via video with some sort of ID, like your driver's license. Help desk people have to be trained to be very suspicious of password resets, multi-factor authentication reset requests that come outside business hours. And monitoring for more than one user registering the same device for multi-factor authentication. So that's the first trend. The next one, AI. Feels like I'm sure every session you've been to has mentioned AI in some way, shape or form. So at the risk of some AI fatigue, I'll limit this session or this part of the discussion to specifically what's happening with cyber and AI. On the plus side, it's doing some very good things. There's some really smart tools out there now that are AI-enabled features for malware detection, malware response, automated patching, doing things a lot more effectively than human-based IT teams could do previously. But it's also being used for evil. We're seeing threat actors or hacker groups adopting particularly generative AI quite heavily to support some of their social engineering campaigns, to create highly convincing outputs like large-scale phishing emails. And they can do that with pretty limited experience, not particularly sophisticated comprehension of the English language. And that means that phishing emails that are coming through are now a lot more convincing than they were a few years ago. And there's studies that have shown that generative AI developed phishing campaigns have something like a 54 or 55% click-through, as opposed to human email-generated ones, which sit around 12%. So that's hugely more effective when you consider the scale that those phishing campaigns are deployed in. Other AI issues, we're seeing an increase in deepfakes. So the ability for AI to generate content like voice, image, video clones. And this isn't really science fiction. In the next slide, I'll touch on a real life example of that. Russia, just to get everyone's attention. Russia and Iran are using generative AI for what they call information operation campaigns, so trying to win hearts and minds around the war in Ukraine. Generative AI also really lowers the barrier to entry for new hacker groups who do want to deploy malware. So previously, before the kind of Gen AI revolution, you needed on your payroll, I guess is how you describe it, some really, really sophisticated, people with really deep understanding of coding to be able to write malware. That's no longer the case because generative AI can write malware for you. There was an example of, I think it was last year, there was a man in Japan who was arrested because he developed malware that was basically deployed and then demanded ransom. He was unemployed, had absolutely no IT experience, and just managed to do this by fiddling around with artificial intelligence. So it's there, it's scary, there's a low barrier to entry now, and that's evidenced by the fact that a number of years ago, e-crime is dominated by 3, 4, 5 large groups. There's now probably more like 50 in the at the top end of town in terms of hackers, because that barrier to entry is so much lower. You can't talk about cyber without talking about China. China's cyber espionage and intelligence collection capabilities reached an inflection point over the last 12 months. China intrusions increased 150% across all sectors compared to the previous 12 months. And interestingly for this crowd, one of the most significant increases was in the financial services sector, which experienced a 300% increase in China, what they call China Nexus intrusions, compared to the previous 12 months. And then finally on the trends, cloud and SaaS intrusions are on the rise. So there was a 26% increase in SaaS intrusions. So that's basically hackers leveraging tools that aren't hosted by the organization themselves to find a way into the systems. And there's another spider group, Scattered Spider, who leverages that as their attack vector really heavily. You might have heard that name in the press because they were responsible for the Qantas cyber attack a month or two ago. Part of the reason for that is that organizations are still increasingly moving their IT infrastructure from being on-premise to cloud-based. Mike, I think, is going to have some thoughts about whether or not that's a good idea shortly. Yep, right side. So just to validate this, I guess, about how this is happening in the financial services sector. Financial services is obviously ripe for the picking. Huge amounts of sensitive personal information, really good ability to get access to financial data, convince organizations and individuals to do things with their money. So globally, financial services firms experience 300 times more attempted attacks than some other industries. So just going through a few examples that demonstrate those different threat vectors I was talking about. So generative AI, its ability to create voice, image, and video clones has led to this new attack vector. And there was some poor, unfortunate finance clerk at the Hong Kong branch of a large multinational financial services firm who was on a video call with the CFO and I think 4 or 5 other people from the organization, who instructed him to make a $25 million US dollar payment, which he dutifully did. Every person on that call, other than him, was an AI-generated video clone. So really super, super convincing stuff. Pretty bad day in the office for that guy. Second example up there, Evolve Bank and Trust were subject to a ransomware attack. So ransomware is still very prevalent. This was last year. The attackers ended up leaking 7.6, 7.8 million client records because they decided not to pay the ransom. I think the key takeaway there is to protect against that kind of attack. You need to have an incident response plan drafted and ready to go. And you also need to have leadership who's prepared to make principles-based decisions about paying ransoms. So hindsight's 2020, but people who've critiqued the approach in that scenario, because of the massive fallout, there has been some criticism that maybe that was one where the ransom could have been paid. And then the final one, looking at this sort of attack vector of attacking the supply chain. July this year, hackers accessed a third-party CRM system that was used by Allianz Life Insurance in North America. That exposed personal information for most of Allianz Life's 1.4 million customers, as well as information about financial professionals and employees as well. So massive reputational damage there. Sort of almost at time, but I'll just run through some of the questions that you should be asking if you do get hacked. So hopefully you've got a cyber incident response plan, or if you've outsourced the majority of your services or the running of the business, you've at least had a peruse of your service provider's incident response plan and made sure that it ties in with decision makers in your organization. But the types of questions you'll need to ask yourself are up on the screen, which I can't quite see. Do you notify? And if so, who do you notify? So if you've got personal information exposed, let's say it's by a hacker group, there's a pretty good chance that that's a serious harm privacy breach that you have to notify to the Privacy Commissioner and affected individuals. But if it hasn't reached that serious harm threshold, or the breach doesn't necessarily involve personal information, should you voluntarily notify? And that question comes up a lot because organizations are worried about brand damage if they're seen as being not particularly transparent. Other notification obligations, potentially to Financial Markets Authority. And one that often gets overlooked is contractual notification obligations. So everyone's focused on regulatory obligations, but often in contracts, there are obligations to notify the counterparty if you experience a cyber attack. Do you bring in law enforcement? There's pros and cons there. So people like the National Cybersecurity Centre, they have a lot of resources that can help you if you suffer a material cyber incident. But then some of the downsides are you potentially lose control of the management of the incident. Any information that you disclose immediately loses legal professional privilege, which could be an issue if you get sued down the track. Do you pay the ransom? That's a huge one. I mean, that always depends on the circumstances. What we say when we're training boards and execs is that standing on principle and saying we will never pay a cyber ransom, we won't negotiate with terrorists, that's all well and good until it actually plays out. It's a lot more nuanced than that. I've forgotten. Oh yeah, just part of the incident response plan, you should be thinking about what sort of external support you might need to bring in and bring them on the journey of your training. So I'm talking there about forensic IT people, PR, comms, HR experts if you don't have any on site. There's a whole host, and obviously lawyers, there's a whole host of people that you should be able to bring in. If we've got time at the end, I might go through some of the regulatory changes that we've seen in response to this, but I don't want to steal your thunder. Joe, were there any questions that came through? No? Okay. Hand over.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike. I've got two hats. My company, we make superannuation software to manage your super scheme. That's not the subject of today, but that's the other hat that I wear. The hat that I've got on today is to talk to you about infrastructure, and I'm a 4-cycle certified infrastructure consultant. I'll tell you what the 4 cycles are in a minute. 4 cycles, 10 years each, means I'm old, which is unfortunate. But we're in year 2 of the 4th cycle, if you hold on to that thought. So I want to pick up today on a kind of narrow context, because we've only got, 20 minutes, to talk about this concept of cloud. So I want to pick up on the narrow context of singling out 2 key points when it comes to IT running your business. What do you think those 2 points might be? What's important to IT? Well, it's your apps. It's the apps that you use to run your business. That's the first key piece. They need to be fit for purpose as well, but that's another subject for another day. And the other important key element for IT to worry about running your business is your data. Your apps need to be fast and reliable, and your data needs to be fast and reliable. Your data also needs to be safe and secure, and Nick's done a great job of talking about that for his session. And I'm not going to talk about the safety and security of it. I'm going to talk about the speed and reliability of it. So if your apps have to be fast and reliable, these are the apps that you use to run your business, and the data that those apps rely on has to be fast and reliable, then why on earth would you put it in the cloud? It's a really dumb idea. So before we talk about why that's a dumb idea, let's define what the cloud is. Who knows what the cloud is? Who's technical in the room? Anyone technical in the room? There's no technical people in, that's great. So the cloud for me is a kind of a lazy outsource option for people who don't want to run their IT department, who don't want to be involved in their own data center, who don't want to know about their data. It's kind of outsourcing your entire responsibility to someone else. Makes you a lazy bum. Okay, so that's what the cloud, that's how I define the cloud. The cloud is the 3rd of the 4 cycles. So coming back to 4 cycles, the very first cycle you'll all remember, back in the 70s when I started in IT, was the mainframe world. That was cycle number 1. That's when you held all your data and your apps close to you. That was the mainframe. People got a bit sick of that. The next cycle, 10 years later, went into distributed computing. Let's distribute everything away from the mainframe and put it away from you. It was the beginning of the thinking about the cloud. That went for 10 years. The 3rd cycle was the cloud itself. Let's get your data and your apps as far away as possible as we possibly can. Well, let's connect you to your data on 17 multiple pieces of wet string up in the States somewhere, and let's have no control and no idea where your data is, no idea what or who's controlling it. That was the 3rd cycle. And that was where your apps and your data go away from you. And now the 4th cycle, which we're 2 years into, is called edge computing. Edge computing is where we bring, guess what? The data and the apps back to you. Try and get it closer to you, just like we did in the mainframe days. Unfortunately, IT is not immune from any of the cycles that the housing market or the financial market is all very cyclical, so is IT. We're not immune to that either. But it's not as black and white as that. We have a thing called the cloudy line. The cloudy line it's a continuum, so you can't say we're in the cloud or we're not. You can't say we're on-premise or we're not. It's a continuum line, and I call that the cloudy line. One end of the cloudy line is on-premise, where your apps and your data live with you on your own premises, and the other end of the cloudy line is Apple, or Microsoft Azure, or Google, or Amazon. That's the other end of the cloudy line. Somewhere in the middle, there are some data centers that are closer to you, and some in New Zealand. People like Infratil are building data centers like crazy, as well as owning my airport in Wellington. They also build data centers. And that's kind of midpoint on the cloudy line, because it's not on-premise, it's not on your premise, but it's not in Singapore either. It's in Auckland. Some of those more on-premise and this end of the cloudy line arguments are all about getting your apps and data closer to you. Some people go the wrong way up the cloudy line. So I'll give you an example, Cheramie. Who knows Cheramie, right? Everyone knows Cheramie. 20 years I've been using Cheramie, probably longer. Cheramie used to be on-premise, and it was fast, and it was easy to use, and there was no lag in it, and it was just click and go. It was a wonderful product. It was probably, Cheramie in my profession was what we used to test the speed of a connection in a new customer. When we set up a PC, we would go to Cheramie because it was the benchmark performance that you would use to test your new network. Then Cheramie got bought by, once the young fellas that invented it got bought out, and it ended up moving up the cloudy line towards the big guys, up at the Google and Amazon end of the cloudy line, and it got slower and more laggy. And I don't know who uses Cheramie today, but it's the worst possible experience you could ever have using a online auction site that you could possibly ever have. Sorry if there's any Cheramie people in the room, but it's an absolutely terrible performance disaster in my view. And that's because they've gone the wrong way up the cloudy line. So that's kind of an example of why you need to be really, really careful about bringing that data and that apps down closer to you. So just 6 reasons why the cloud, it's finished. We're finished with the cloud. The cloud is, it's edge computing. That's the new thing. Make sure you ask your IT department about that, and make sure you are ready for it, because we're 2 years into that 10-year cycle. That's what's coming. And if you're stuck in the cloud or you're heading that way, you're behind. Latency and performance. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you a little technical training exercise on what you can take home and you can do on your own computer at home to show you how the cloud is 50 times slower than your on-premise computing environment. 50 times, I promise. I'm going to show you that video, and I promise you'll go home and you'll do it yourself and you'll see the same result. And you'll all be little latency technicians by the time I'm finished with you. And that is the first reason the cloud is no good, because it's very, very slow. The second reason it's no good is because it's at the wrong end of a piece of string that you don't control. You know, we live in a Pacific island called New Zealand. It's not these massive pipes, hose pipes that you get in the States where data flows freely. We have terrible internet here. I live in Carterton in the Wairarapa, and I take the train to Wellington to work. There's 600 of us on the train, and there's 3 trains in the morning. There's 1,800 people each way going to Wellington, and there's no internet. The internet's awful. Yes, there's 5G in one little town and 5G in another little town, but that whole hour-and-a-half trip for 1,800 people, the productivity that's been calculated to be millions and millions of dollars of lost productivity, because no one can make internet work on the train. It doesn't exist in other countries. There's a train line, you put fibre up it and you put little cellular things on it, and it works in other countries, but not here. We can't do that. So the wrong end of a slow internet connection is not the way to run your business. When you're on premise, you don't have that problem. When there's no internet, everything keeps running. The cost is another biggie. So cloud looks cheap when you start, but it's a meter that keeps running. It just keeps on ticking. And every month it goes, ooh, gee, that was an expensive month in the cloud, and the next month, and the next month, and it never stops. At least with on-premise, you can fix your pricing and you can get a good budget on the subject. Data sovereignty is a classic one. Data sovereignty, if you want the data, if you want to wrap your arms around your own data and have it close to you, then don't put it in the cloud. You have no idea where it is. No idea where it's being replicated to. Resilience and continuity, it's a biggie, especially in this country. If your internet goes down and you're in the cloud, you stop. Everyone goes home. The whole company goes home. When you're on premise, the whole company keeps going, which is pretty cool. So really, that is my pitch to you, that we're in the fourth cycle. We're not in the third cycle. The third cycle is finished. You should all move off the cloud and go back to on-premise and be happy with that. I'm going to play you a little video now. What I want you to do is all go home, get into your computer, get a little command prompt. If you don't know how to get a command prompt, I'll show you after. Find your gateway. Do you see the gateway where it says 192.168.0.1? That's your gateway. Find that, ping it, see how many milliseconds you get. And then, once you see how many milliseconds you get, go ping Google. Google is on 8.8.8.8. You can see there. And see how many milliseconds you get. Right. What have we got? We've got your gateway back at home. This is your company gateway. Do this in your business, by the way. Don't do this at home. Do this in your company. Because at home, it works the same way, but it's not the point. In your business, do you see the time that it takes me to send packets of data around your network is 1 millisecond? Do you see that? And do you see when we go to Google, it's 54, 53, 50, whatever millisecond. That's 50 times, folks. 50 times slower to get packets of data up to Google and back than it is to do it in your own premises. That's what we call lag. And so when you're sitting on your application, like your Salesforce application or whatever application, TradeMe, whatever you're running in the cloud, and it sort of gets all laggy and hard to use and stutters and stops, that's latency, and that's what you're looking at there. Questions, Joe, from the audience?
I do have a couple questions. One is, one specifically for Nick. How useful is cyber insurance?
Nick, it's all yours.
Just check. Yep, that's working. That's a really interesting question. So I moved back to New Zealand from Sydney, where I was working for a number of years in 2018, and cyber insurance, or the insurers, were making a massive push into New Zealand on cyber insurance. It hadn't been really popular until then. And the premiums were really, really good value at the time. And then fast forward a few years and we had some really high profile cyber attacks, and the insurers took an absolute bath. So premiums went up quite a lot. And so the trend that we've been seeing is that particularly our larger clients are self-insuring on cyber because just the premiums are so expensive that they've chosen to take it in-house and take the risk. So we've seen a massive uptick in work on the cyber resilience side of things because our clients are sort of doing it themselves, and we're coming in to help them with that. Where cyber insurance can be very useful is there's obviously the insurance aspect of it, but you typically get a whole lot of value-added services as well. So you'll get access to people that come in and help you with your training. You get access to a panel of PR people, lawyers, whatever it is that you might need. You get access to people who can sort of help you through the breach life cycle. So if you don't have those people on standby, if you don't have preferred providers of those types of services, if you just want a one-stop shop and the premium isn't absolutely eye-watering, then cyber insurance can be useful.
Okay, next question. I've noticed a lot of deep fake investment scams on Facebook recently, targeting Kiwis involving Gareth Morgan, Carmel Fisher, and Mary Hall. What responsibility do social media platforms have in preventing these scams?
Yeah, that's an interesting philosophical question, I think. Legally, they've got none, but what we're seeing, I mean, not just in the cyber side of things or the deepfake side of things, but there's a growing regulatory and public backlash against the platforms because of how much market power they've got, how much of the content they do control. And so we are seeing a bit of a shift towards greater awareness from the likes of Meta and Google to their social license to operate, because they're trying to front foot some of this regulatory action that they're getting. That's mostly been in the antitrust or competition space around the world recently. But I think if we don't see them taking action against things like deepfakes or other scams, you know, they'll certainly be in the crosshairs from a regulatory perspective there as well, is my guess. So the short answer there is no legal responsibility or regulatory responsibility at this stage. But if they want to stay out of the regulatory crosshairs, they should be doing everything they can.
The next two questions are for Mike. Why did businesses like Cheramie move to the cloud? What was the benefit? Will it be really expensive to change from cloud back to on-site premises?
Yeah, so I can't really talk on behalf of Cheramie. At the end of the day, they were just an example. What I can do is talk about why and in this room we've got 4 organisations who are leading the way in what I call the fourth cycle edge leaders. These people have decided to move in a way that is the reverse or the opposite of what Cheramie did, I guess, and that's Joe's company, Anglican Financial Care, have definitely moved to the edge. Melville Jessup Weaver in the corner. iSelect, who are a little QRops organisation down in Ashburton, and of course Civic Financial Services who are here as well. I saw them just before. So these people have already adopted the reverse of what Cheramie did. I would imagine with Cheramie it's all about the larger organisations that acquired them who already had that strategy going forward. I don't think that would have been a Cheramie-led decision. I would even go so far as to say that they were probably pretty upset with what was going to happen to their baby, you know, that they'd built and that was being used as a performance benchmark. And if I was to hazard a guess, I'd say there would be some pretty tense conversations happening in the boardroom after the acquisition.
And cost to switch?
To switch back. Yeah, it's horses for courses. I mean, every situation's different. There's a migration. There's some infrastructure that you need to buy, and there's a migration that you need to do. Depends on the platform, really.
How do you handle the risk of something happening to your premises if that's where all your data is?
That's a very good question. So you make sure you replicate it is the answer. So can I use your example, Steve? Yep. So in the case of Melville Jessup Weaver, they have an Auckland office on-premise and a Wellington office on-premise. So what they do is they have 2 sets of infrastructure that talk to each other, and every single day both offices are kept in sync with each other. So when Wellington has the big earthquake, or when Auckland, I don't know what you're going to have, tornado, something in Auckland. Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, whichever city goes first, the other one gets to run the entire operation for both ends. So yeah, it's a good point. You don't want to just have everything in one on-premise solution. You really need to have replicated clusters.
Okay, here's one for a combination of you both. What are your thoughts on cybersecurity firms who offer services through the cloud?
Go on then.
To be honest, that's how most managed service providers operate these days. That's including cybersecurity as a managed service. So it'd be difficult to find someone that actually comes in and runs your on-prem infrastructure from a cyber perspective. I'll let you speak to that one. What I would say is, going back to that remote monitoring and management discussion I was having, that is all enabled because of cloud-based access. So someone who's not at your location is able to get remote access to your machine because that's a convenient way of providing things like help desk services. You wouldn't let someone you don't know access your machine if they actually had to physically walk up to your desk and do it. So it's a much more convenient way for a lot of people to get access to managed services and cyber services, but it does create risks, and that access to remote monitoring and management tools is something that hackers have been exploiting to great effect over the last 12 months or so.
Okay, there is another one. Sorry, just has to reset. One of the key advantages touted by cloud providers is redundancy over international regions through example zone pairing versus maintaining physical tapes with the same country or on-premises. How does on-premises fare in terms of business resilience if a national crisis were to occur?
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so good question. It's the same answer though. It's have your on-premise solution replicate somewhere that you're comfortable with. You just have to be really careful with the zone pairing and the data in every country. As soon as you put data in each country, it's subject to that country's laws normally. You're the expert on that. But I don't want my data sitting in the US where the US authorities can now request that data and get their hands on it if they want to for whatever reason. I'd much rather have my data here with me being handled under New Zealand law. Thank you very much. As far as protecting it goes, get yourself a decent infrastructure consultant who can craft you a replicated scenario that works for your sized organisation, like Steve did.
I was going to ask if you know any decent.
Yeah.
Where would you say the sweet spot is on the cloudy line?
The sweet spot on the cloudy line, that's a good one. Yeah, so it's the cloudy line works real good up the cloud end for things like email. So I'm a great believer in Microsoft's Office 365 Exchange Online, wonderful product. Email's great sitting in the cloud. That's all right, because when it's slow or it disappears, it's email backup is something that you'd have a view on. All of you in the audience would be either very interested in keeping your email, or if it goes missing, you don't care. So putting that to one side, the fact that it's slow and terrible on the end of a piece of wet string is not a problem for email, because if it takes 5 minutes to get an email or 10 minutes to get an email, it doesn't really matter. That's not a kind of a mission critical thing. So that can be up one end of the cloudy line. I would certainly bring all of your financial applications and things that your users use to conduct their day-to-day business, bring them down the other end and be more on-premise. So they would be your core business applications, especially your financial applications.